the Grouchy Nerd.
Alright, quiet down, knuckleheads. It's time to take another look at a new hero for Fantasy Flight Games Marvel Champions. This time we're looking at Iceman. Now his preferred slider. Bobby Drake started showing signs of his mutation, the ability to harness cold and control and manipulate ice, at an early age. When Bobby and his girlfriend were attacked by a bully and his gang, Bobby used these powers to encase the bully in ice, saving the girl but outing himself as a mutant. The locals formed a lynch mob who broke into his house and attacked his family. Word reached Charles Xavier, who sent Scott Summers to rescue Bobby and recruit him to Xavier's school for gifted youngsters. There he learned how to better control his abilities, even learning to freeze himself and control and freeze the moisture in the air to create snowballs, and even get around on an ice slide, which appears to be bound by no single law of physics. And he was part of the first class of the X-Men as Iceman, along with Cyclops, Marvel, Girl, Beast, and Angel. Following a falling out with Xavier, Bobby left the team for a while, but came back when he heard that his former teammates were in trouble, though he did not rejoin the team. Instead, he headed west and enrolled in college at UCLA, along with former teammate and fellow mutant Warren Worthington III, better known to the world as Angel. They, along with Ghost Rider, Hercules, and Black Widow, formed the first iteration of the Champions, though this team did not last long. From there, he teamed up with the Defenders and X-Factor before finally returning to the X-Men. He was briefly possessed by a comatose Emma Frost, who was able to tap into aspects of his power that Bobby never could. After first being kind of Emma Frosty about it, she helped him learn to turn his body fully into ice in order to heal himself. His ice body even shattered at one point, but he was able to reform it from latent moisture, which is just weird. But it also placed him among the Omega level mutants, meaning there is no definable upper limit to his mutation strength. Since then, he was blessed by a priest, so now his ice is made of holy water for fighting vampires. He helped Wolverine reform the mutant school, now named for Jean Grey. Honey, they shrunk the Iceman and stuck him in Kitty Pryde to fight a brood infection. He fought against the Avengers with the X-Men, but then fought with the Avengers against the Phoenix Five. And when Bobby and the rest of the first class of the X-Men were brought to the present day by Beast, a time-displaced Jean Grey suddenly outed him. Or possibly wanted a gay friend and she incepted the idea into his head, because he's been a character for like 50 years and has literally never given any indication, no indication, previous to this conversation, that he was gay. Also, if you are someone who happens upon information about someone you know being gay or bi or poly or pan or a, either because you're psychic or because you saw it on a letter somewhere, no you didn't. Just a quick PSA, no you didn't. That's not your information, Jean Grey. That's how you get people killed or disowned. That's how you ruin lives, Jennifer Grayson. Let's take a look, and we're going to start on his alter ego side this time. Bobby Drake has a recover of 4 and the mutant trait. He gets 11 hit points and 6 cards in his hand. On setup, you'll find all 6 copies of Frostbite and set them aside. And he gets Cool Off. As a response, after you change to this form, you can shuffle 1 card with the ice trait from your discard pile into your deck for each Frostbite in play. So we've seen shuffle a card from your discard pile into your deck, be it from a trait or just from your hero kit. This is doing that, but it's potentially doing 6 at a time. I mean, it's not very likely that you're going to have all 6 Frostbites in play, but you might, and even if you only have 2 or 3 in play and you do this and you're shuffling 2 or 3 of your very best cards back into your deck, so you're going to see them again, and then later into the game, as the more times you do this and the more times that you put those ice cards back into your deck, the more often you're going to see them once you're set up with your upgrades and your supports already in play. This is amazing! On his hero side is Iceman, who does 1 thwart, 2 attack, and 3 defend. His hand size goes to 5, and he has Ice and X-Men traits. And Freeze as an interrupt when Iceman makes a basic attack or defense against an enemy. Attach a set-aside copy of Frostbite to that enemy. Well, there's not a ton to talk about there until we know what Frostbite looks like, so let's take a look. Frostbite is an upgrade with no cost because that's not how it comes into play. It has the condition and ice traits and the permanent keyword. The attached enemy gets -1 to their scheme and attack. After the attached enemy activates or leaves play, set this card aside. Well, we already know we're going to have to flip to Alter Ego kind of a lot, so this means that if you are able to put a few Frostbites on the villain before you flip down to Alter Ego, you might not be dealing with a ton of threat. Maybe? Up first in his kit is 2 copies of Snow Clone, a 2-cost ally with 2 HP and the Ice and X-Men traits. It cannot have attachments attached to it, and it can't thwart, but it does attack for 2. And if it attacks an enemy with a copy of Frostbite attached to it, it won't take consequential damage. Alright, so you can't Voltron them. You can't just load them up with upgrades and then let them go crazy with no consequential damage like Black Cat or Yondu or somebody, but there are 2 of them. They're pretty cheap to get out, and they don't take consequential damage as long as you get to get an attack off first and lay that Frostbite down. But then that's doing 6 damage. 2 for you, 2 for each of them. That's great. Power Belt is a 2-cost upgrade. It has the item and tech traits, and it gives Iceman 3 hit points. And as a hero, it can generate a wild resource to pay for an ice card, making those ice clones only cost 1. And bringing his hit points up to a very respectable 14. Next is another 2-cost upgrade, Cryokinetic Perception, which has the superpower trait. It's a hero response after you resolve your freeze ability, exhaust this card to draw 1 card. If the card you drew has the ice trait, Ready Iceman. Well, you can't count on the Ready because you don't know you're going to draw an ice card, but that's why you want to flip down to Alter Ego and get those ice cards back into your deck so that you're more likely to draw a nice card off of this, but you are always going to get that draw on freeze, which is just doing your basic attack, your basic defend, which you're going to probably be doing anyway, so it's just a free card. That's great. Then we get yet another 2-cost upgrade. This one is Ice Slide. It has the Ice and Superpower traits and gives Iceman +1 to all of his basic stats, plus the aerial trait. But as a forced response, after you change to Alter Ego form, shuffle this into your deck. That's a trap. Well, putting it out and then feeling like you can't get rid of it because then you lose all those stat boosts, that's a trap. Part of this game is knowing when it's okay to get rid of a card that you really like. Learning to play Thor and knowing that sometimes you gotta chuck Mjolnir to pay for something because then you can scoop it back up out of your discard pile. It's a game changer for Thor. Same kind of deal here. You can put out the Ice Slide and you can do 1 round where you're gonna get 3 attack and 2 thwart and all of that fun stuff, but then it's gonna have to go away. You're gonna have to drop back down into Alter Ego so you can keep loading ice cards into your deck so that you can keep using Cryokinetic Perception to ready. 2 copies of a 3-cost upgrade is next. Frozen Solid has the condition and ice traits, and it may only be played in hero form. It attaches to an enemy at a max of 1 per enemy. As a forced interrupt, when the attached enemy would activate, discard Frozen Solid, then attach a Frostbite. So it's a bit like Spider-Man's Webbed Up, except instead of leaving the enemy with a stun, it's going to leave it with a Frostbite, which might not be as useful on paper, but remember that also means that your snow clones are going to get to attack that enemy without taking consequential damage, and we're about to look at a few more cards that care about whether or not there's a Frostbite already on an enemy. Next up is 1 copy of Ice Wall, a support with the ice trait that costs a whopping 4 resources. As a forced interrupt, when an identity would take any amount of damage, place that damage here instead. Then if there is at least 8 damage here, discard this and place a Frostbite on the enemy that just attacked. Yeah, you're not wrong. 4 is kind of a lot, but it's going to block at least 8 damage for you. At least. It could be a lot more if you take a big hit when there's like 6 or 7 on there. Then we get Arctic Attack, a 2-cost event we get 2 copies of. It has ice and superpower traits. As a hero, either deal 4 damage to an enemy and attach a copy of Frostbite to it, or deal it 6 damage if it already has Frostbite attached to it. So if you're able to use your basic attack to do 2 damage and put down a Frostbite, and then each of your snow clones does 2 damage without taking consequential damage because of that Frostbite, and then you play this to do 6 more damage, that's 12 damage, I think. Ice Blast, another 3-cost event with the ice and superpower traits, is next. As a hero, attach a Frostbite to the villain and each minion engaged with an identity. Then deal 3 damage to each enemy with a Frostbite attached. That's potentially huge. You could have up to 6 Frostbites on various targets around the board, meaning this could go off for 18 damage. Playing true solo, it almost never will. That will almost never come up, but it might. Then we get 3 copies of a 2-cost thwart event, Chill Out, which also has ice and superpower traits. As a hero, remove 3 threat from a scheme and attach Frostbite to an enemy. Something to really keep in mind when you're building decks for Iceman, this is the only threat mitigation that we've come across. And it's the end. This is the end of his kit. There's no more that we're gonna come across. He does 1, his hero does 1 thwart. His clones can't thwart. They don't even thwart for 0. They literally cannot thwart. So this card is all you've got. The bad stuff! Bobby's obligation is hot-headed. After you attach Frostbite to an enemy, take a damage. After you take a basic recover action, you can discard this. But not remove it from the game, keeping up with the trend of mutants having these obligations that only get discarded, and also suck so bad. But using a basic recover, unless you really need it anyway, that's kind of a bummer for Iceman. That means that's a whole activation that he doesn't get to put a Frostbite out because it's not a basic attack or defend. You got to use your basic ability on a recover. Ugh. Bobby's signature Nemesis minion is Pyro, who has the Brotherhood trait and 4 hit points. He does 1 scheme and 3 attack, and he's gonna do that attack right away because he has stupid Quick Strike. And it gets worse, his attacks do indirect damage. So even if you use one of your snow clones to block this attack, that's gonna take 2 of the damage, but you still have to either take or dole out that last one. Plus, I don't think I've said this in a while, Quick Strike is so stupid. Playing with fire is Pyro's side scheme. It has an acceleration icon and comes into play with 3 threat on it, which isn't so bad, but that's kind of the point because when it's defeated, discard the top 3 cards of their deck and take 1 indirect damage for each resource icon discarded this way. Another thing to keep in mind when you're deck building for Iceman, maybe don't bring along those classic resource cards, Energy, Genius, and Strength, because they might hurt a lot. Next is Pyro's Flamethrower, which either attaches to Pyro or gains Surge. If it goes on Pyro, it'll make his attacks discard the top card of your deck, giving Pyro's attack +1 for each resource on that card. Yeah, that's all very bad. Last is 2 copies of a Treachery, Burn. When it's revealed, discard the top 2 cards of your deck, or 3 cards if Pyro is in play, and take indirect damage for each discarded resource. If it's drawn as a boost card, you'll discard the top card of your deck and give the activation a boost icon for each resource, wasting cards and dealing you damage. What a horrible Nemesis set. Onto his aspect cards, Iceman came with an aggression deck. Up first is Shark Girl, played by Iaro dos Santos, a 2-cost ally with 2 hit points in the X-Men trait. She does 0 thwart and 2 attack, and that attack will do +1 for each upgrade attached to that enemy. Now that's not an attachment, it's not attachment cards, it's upgrades, which are hero cards, that are attached to the enemy. There aren't a ton of those. Frostbite is an example, but there aren't many throughout the game. Valkyrie's got Deathglow. Scarlet Witch has a couple. Spider-Man's got Webbed Up. Those they don't really go super well with this, but Frostbite definitely does. And Cyclops, she's actually Cyclops' best friend. Cyclops has 3 on board his kit anyway, 3 upgrades that can go on enemies, plus his pack came with a card in each aspect that attaches to the enemy. Glob, in the style of Robert Herman, is next. He's a 3-cost ally with 3 hit points, the X-Men trait, and requires your identity to have the X-Men trait to play him. He does 2 thwart at 2 consequential damage, and 2 attack at 1 consequential damage, and after he enters play, he does 2 damage to an enemy with an upgrade attached. So same list of heroes that he's potentially good for, and same emphasis on Iceman and especially Cyclops, but also, can you imagine you're a mutant and you look like a creepy skeleton in a pink blob, and then in walks Psylocke, looking all Olivia Munn, and you're going, we're both mutants? Why? And to go along with these two, we're going to get 3 copies of a new upgrade that attaches to a minion, Suppressing Fire. It's a 0-cost tactic upgrade, and when you defeat the minion it's attached to, heal 2 damage from your hero. It's a tactic, so again, really good for Cyclops, but it's good in general in true solo when you can't necessarily flip down to alter ego and deal with all the threat that you're going to incur, especially playing aggression. It's nice to have a card that allows you to stay in hero form and heal rather than having to flip down and heal. Next is 3 copies of Surprise Move, a 1-cost event with the tactic trait. As a hero interrupt, when you make a basic attack against an enemy with an upgrade attached, you get +2 to that attack. If this defeats that enemy, ready your hero. Now, Iceman does have a pretty solid defend at 3, and if you've got your Ice Slide out, that's going to get that up to a 4. So using your basic defend to lay down a Frostbite, and then using this to deal a ton of damage and get a ready out of it. And it's another tactic, so it's yet another card that's great for Cyclops. What is going on? Then we get 3 copies of Take That, a 3-cost attack event. As a hero action, deal 7 damage to an enemy with an upgrade attached. Again, amazing if you can use this with Iceman after you've done a basic defend and then you're not too concerned about that cost of 3. Another one that's great in Cyclops. He's got all those attachments, and one that is very, very good for Valkyrie. She can put her Death Glow on the villain and then use this to do 7 damage to it. Don't worry, I'm leaving the Valkyrie standing to D20. I still think she sucks. Next is 1 copy of Keep Up the Pressure, a 0-cost player side scheme which comes into play with 2 threat on it per identity. It has victory 0, and when it's defeated, each identity may search their deck and discard pile for an attack event and add it to their hand. Until the end of the phase, each attack event deals 1 additional damage. These are always great to use on attack events that do multiple instances of damage, like Black Widow's Dance of Death, which does 1 damage, 2 damage, 3 damage. This is going to make it do 2 damage, 3 damage, 4 damage. That's 11 damage. Do you know who does not have any attack events that do multiple instances of damage? Iceman. Our first basic card is Shadowcat in the style of Kitty Pryde. She's a 3-cost ally with 3 hit points who does 2 thwart and 1 attack. She has the X-Men trait, and so must your identity to play her. After you play her from your hand, choose a side scheme in play. It will lose each acceleration, amplify, crisis, and hazard icon on it until the end of the round. I like that ability. It's cool to be able to turn one of those off. Especially something like the crisis icon when you know you have to go after the main scheme. I don't know if I like it for 3 cost when it's pretty conditional. You don't know you're going to have a side scheme in play that this will matter for. So I'm not sure about taking her, but I do like the ability. And last is Beak, as played by Barney Bowhusk. He's a 2-cost ally with the X-Men trait and 2 hit points. He only does 1s in each stat, but after you play him from your hand, remove 1 threat from a scheme for each X-Men ally you control. I mean, that's definitely a solid include for any deck that's got a lot of X-Men allies. Probably don't put any non-X-Men allies in that deck so you can make the most out of them. But both Ice clones have X-Men trait, and of course, once more, Cyclops can take X-Men traits from any aspect, so why wouldn't his whole deck be full of X-Men allies? Take Beak along. Iceman is a little tricky to wrap your head around, or at least he was kind of tricky for me to wrap my head around. He's a hero who really likes flipping down into alter ego form so he can put those ice cards back into his deck so cryogenic perception is more likely to ready him. But on the other hand, he has almost no threat management, so every time you do flip down to alter ego, you're risking taking a huge amount of threat. But then back on that first hand, the more you're able to use your freeze ability and the more you're able to put down frostbites on the villain, that's going to make their scheme go lower and lower and lower so that when you do flip down to alter ego, maybe you're taking 1 or 2 threat instead of 4 or 5 threat. And on that, cryogenic perception is probably your most important card to get into play. I mean, we're not talking Hawkeye's quiver, but it's pretty damn important to everything else you want to have going on here. The readying, the reason that you're putting ice cards into your deck is so that you can draw them for cryogenic perception. So getting that into play, mulligan hard for it if you have to. Get that into play immediately. And Superpower Training is a great card to bring along anytime you have a definable best card. That lets you find a card that is character specific and get it into play. So if you don't run into Cryogenic Perception, you run into Superpower Training. Either one of them gets you Cryogenic Perception in play. Utopia allows Iceman to ready every time he brings an X-Men ally into play. His snow clones are X-Men allies, and readying, as discussed, is super, super important to getting a lot of Frostbites in play. Team building exercise, of course team building exercise, of course team building exercise. Every single one of his cards has the ice trait, which he also has, so there's a discount right there. Bring along 2 of them. Bring along a deft focus too, a couple of other superpowers, including Cryogenic Perception. You'll be flipping form pretty often, so Moira McTaggart is a good one to bring along. Take a drink every time I say an X-Men character should bring along Moira McTaggart. Playing in aggression means you can slap combat training on Bobby, and even though you can't put upgrades on the snow clones, you can put boot camp into play, which is going to boost their attacks to 3. So now that very basic combination of you attack and put on a frostbite and then they each attack, that's going to do 9 damage. Justice lets you take upside the head, which confuses the villain, and that makes it that much safer when you do have to flip down to alter ego and put those ice cards back into your deck. Leadership means you can make it a classic Iceman and Domino mess around. Domino, as long as you keep her alive, you just use her first. She's going to be able to put an ice card on top of your deck. You attack. You use freeze, you use cryogenic perception, you draw that card. It's an ice. You ready. Look at that. Who could have guessed? Domino. All right, that's all I got for Iceman. Now get off my lawn.
The Grouchy Nerd.